To lead a better life, I need a love of my own.
So the song we're going to be talking about here today is a biggie because on numerous occasions Paul McCartney has said that of all the songs he's ever written, and let's be honest, he's written one or two in his time, but of all the songs he's ever written, this one is his favourite. He thinks this is the best song he's ever done. And John Lennon was also high in praise of this song. He would say that this is one of his favourite songs the Beatles ever did, and would also say that this was the best song on Revolver. And according to Paul, this song is the only time where John Lennon complimented Paul to his face on one of his songs. Apparently he would say to Paul that it's a really good song and better than a lot of John's own songs, so that goes to show its quality because John did not do that very often. And George Martin as well also thought that this was one of Paul McCartney's best ever songs. So yeah, it's quite a good song we're talking about here today, quite a biggie. Welcome back to Revolver In-Depth, and this is episode 5, Here, There and Everywhere. So on May 19th of 1966, Bruce Johnson of the Beach Boys was in London to promote the Beach Boys' then new album Pet Sounds, which at that point had been released in America but was yet to be released in Britain, so Bruce had been sent over to London to do a bit of promotion for the album. Johnson met with Keith Moon of The Who, and the pair went to the Scotch of St James Club where Moon would introduce Johnson to John Lennon and Paul McCartney for the first time. Now eventually they would all go back to Johnson's hotel room and listen to Pet Sounds for the first time, and Lennon and McCartney had their minds blown. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. They both thought this was one of the greatest things they'd ever heard, and Paul McCartney in particular absolutely loved God Only Knows. He has said on numerous occasions since that of all pop songs that have ever been written, God Only Knows is his favourite of the lot. So yeah, they obviously had their minds blown by Pet Sounds that night. So then one day in June 1966, McCartney would go across to Lennon's house called Kenwood, which was in Weybridge, for a writing session. But when he got there, he found Lennon was still in bed fast asleep. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about Lennon and his sleeping habits in this period, we'll go and watch episode 3 in this series about I'm Only Sleeping, where you can hear all about it. But anyway, McCartney got there, and rather than wake Lennon up, he thought, I'll go and have a sit down. It was a sunny June day, warm sunny day. We're going to have a sit down by Lennon's swimming pool, obviously how the other half live, eh? And he would decide that he would start writing a new song while he waited. So whilst waiting and feeling inspired by the Beach Boys' God Only Knows, McCartney took his guitar out and started strumming in E, and he soon had a few chords, and pretty quickly he got some lyrics as well to put on top of it. And by the time Lennon had got up, the song was pretty much finished. Now just as a little side note here, McCartney has actually contradicted himself on the writing of this song, because he has also said that in March 1965, whilst the Beatles were filming Help in Austria in the Alps, it's a scene in Help where they're doing the skiing and it's Ticket to Ride that's playing, that scene. Whilst they had some time off, John and Paul were in their hotel room somewhere, and they presented to each other some cassettes which had demos on that they'd written at the time. And one of the demos that Paul had at that point was Here, There and Everywhere, and that was apparently when John complimented him to his face on it. Now this demo has never surfaced, and it's just strange that this is the only time he's ever spoke about March 65, it being written. Every other time it's been the swimming pool in June 66 after hearing God Only Knows. So personally, I think it was written in June 66 for the most part after hearing God Only Knows. I think maybe at this point in 65 he maybe had the lyrics or some of the lyrics, but I don't think it was in a finished state. Just my opinion. Now on the subject of the lyrics, McCartney had written these with Jane Asher in mind, who was his then girlfriend, but in terms of the actual vocal style, you would think this was inspired by the Beach Boys and Carl Wilson. However, Paul claims it was only the intro of the song that was inspired by Carl Wilson. The actual vocal style he sings this in was inspired by Marianne Faithfull, apparently. Paul says this was him trying to do an impression of Faithfull, which I would never have guessed if I hadn't read it before doing this video, but there you go. Apparently the vocals on this song is Paul trying to do an impression of Marianne Faithfull. The Beatles would begin recording Here, There and Everywhere at Abbey Road Studios, or EMI Studios as it was known then, on June 14th of 1966. Now to begin with, they would work on the basic track. They would do 4 takes of the basic track, however only one of them was a complete take, take 4, and that's the one that they would work on doing overdubs for the rest of this day's session. So after feeling that the basic track had been nailed, McCartney, Lennon and Harrison would turn their attention to overdubbing the vocal harmonies onto the song. Now to do this, George Martin would actually arrange the vocal harmonies and he would coach them how to do it. Now later on, Martin would sort of play down his input to this song. He would be very British about it and be like, nah, it wasn't that big a deal, it was very simple what I did. Really what he did was coach them how to do one of the best vocal performances the Beatles ever did. Anyway, by the end of this day's session, they'd kind of done a bit of work here, but going forward, nothing from this day's session would end up being used in the end, and nothing from this day's session has ever been released either, so you can't hear any of this, so we don't actually know what it sounded like, but They obviously felt it wasn't good enough. So the next session would take place 2 days later on June 16th of 1966, and to begin with, the band worked on the basic track again. They would record 9 further takes of it, numbered takes 5 to 13, and they would deem take 13, the last one, to be the best of the lot, to then continue applying overdubs to. For the basic track, McCartney played his Epiphone Casino guitar, Harrison played a Rickenbacker 12-string electric guitar, and Starr played drums. Lennon wouldn't play on the basic track. McCartney also recorded a guide vocal as part of the basic track, but this would eventually be wiped. After the basic track was complete, McCartney would overdub his Rickenbacker bass onto the song, and then he, Lennon and Harrison would record 2 sets of harmony vocal performances along with finger clicks. Now, because at this point the band were only working on 4 tracks, they'd now filled up all the tracks, so they needed to create a reduction mix of the song, so they would now do that, and then the reduction mix would be numbered take 14, and then they would continue applying more overdubs. So next up, McCartney would now overdub his lead vocals onto the track, and he would use the same effect that had been used on I'm Only Sleeping, with the tape running slower, and then when it was played back it meant McCartney's voice was faster and at a higher pitch, an effect that all 4 Beatles liked at this point. Now, if you want to hear any outtakes from this day's session, well, good news everybody, you can. Take 6 was released on the 2022 Super Deluxe edition of Revolver. To be honest, it doesn't sound all that different from the finished version, except McCartney's guide vocal is still on that version. It's quite nice, his voice sounds more delicate, but yeah, it's not too different. But there's also take 7. Now this is an interesting one because this was only ever released on the CD single of Real Love in 1996. But other than that CD single, it has never been released on anything else. So unless you own that CD single, you have no way of hearing this, although I think someone has uploaded it online because I have heard it. To be honest, from what I've heard, it's no different from take 6 really. It's virtually the same thing, so if you listen to take 6, you've effectively heard take 7 as well. It's not that different. I've just noticed my shirt kind of blends in with this cushion. Be like, I'm invisible, the invisible man, etc. Anyway, the final session for Here, There and Everywhere took place the following day on June 17th of 1966. So to start off with during this session, McCartney would apply some further harmonies to the line Love Never Dies, Watching Her Eyes, and then Harrison would overdub some extra lead guitar onto the track, and then the track would finally be mixed, and with that, work on the song was complete. Revolver was released on August 5th of 1966, and Here, There and Everywhere would be sequenced as the 5th song on the LP. Now I should have said earlier in the video, but this was the second last song that the band would record for Revolver. Now at the time of the album's release, critics were full of praise for this song, with many calling it McCartney's best song up until that point. Art Garfunkel of Simon and Garfunkel fame would also refer to this song as intoxicating, so he obviously liked it, unless he somehow got drunk on it. I don't know how you get drunk on a song, but I suppose you could get drunk on this song. It is very dreamy. It's a bit like being drunk in some ways, this song. It's very good. I mean, it's not going to surprise any of you to know that I bloody love this song. I think it's a masterpiece through and through. If any of you watching this want to argue that this is Paul McCartney's best song, whilst I wouldn't agree with you, I can fully understand why you would want to argue this is McCartney's best song, because it is worthy of that title. It is so bloody good, man. You can just hear throughout this entire song the God Only Knows influence on it. I know Paul said that it was only the intro that was inspired by God Only Knows, but I think that's bollocks personally. I think the entire song is. And he would also later say that Sgt. Pepper was the direct response by the Beatles to Pet Sounds, despite the fact that Revolver technically came out after Pet Sounds, but Revolver was mostly recorded by the time they heard Pet Sounds. But anyway, regardless of what he says, I think Here, There and Everywhere is the closest we have to a direct response to God Only Knows, because it's they virtually recorded this after Paul had heard the song. It was only a matter of a week or two between it, so yeah, this song is a direct response really to God Only Knows. I would say this is more of a response to it than Sgt. Pepper is personally, but that's just my opinion. Now I've said this before and I'll say it again, McCartney is my favourite Beatle of the lot. I love all 4 of them, but to me McCartney is just in a different league to the other 3. I actually think he made their songs better. I think they were very lucky to be in a band with him, especially Lennon. I mean, compare their solo careers, just the period 1970 to 1980. I think McCartney was in a completely different league to him. And there's often solo Lennon songs where I hear them and I think that would sound better if McCartney had been able to have an input and improve it for Lennon. But anyway, in terms of this song here, it just sounds like it's descended down from the heavens. It's like angels have come down to sing it. Yeah, this entire album is McCartney at his peak. He is on an absolute roll on this album. Every single song is a masterpiece. And you forget kind of just how young McCartney was at this point. I think I said in the Eleanor Rigby video that he was 23. This song's written by a 23-year-old. And I personally think this is probably McCartney's second best song on this album. I think there's one that tops it later on the album that we'll get to. But yeah, he was just in an absolute roll at this point in his life. I think, you know, Lennon and Harrison obviously at this point were very much on the acid path, whereas McCartney wasn't, which is why he's still writing love songs. Obviously McCartney would join the acid path on the next album. But yeah, I like the fact McCartney's not on acid on this album because it gives it that realism kind of charm, whereas Lennon and Harrison's songs are much more dreamy on this album. McCartney's are much more deluged in realism. Am I rambling? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I know what I'm trying to say. Basically, what I'm trying to say is McCartney's songs on this album are in a different league, really, in the grand scheme of things as compositions go. I do love John and George, for the record. I think their songs on this album are brilliant. But yeah, I'm a Paul fanboy. You've come to the wrong bit if you want to hear me say that Lennon's songs are better than McCartney. Everything about this song is just perfect. The vocals, the harmonies. Speaking of the vocals, I didn't know until I did this video that it's supposed to be Paul doing an impression of Marianne Faithfull. I would never have guessed that. I just assumed it was him trying to do Carl Wilson, which it does sound like that. It sounds nothing like Marianne Faithfull, in my opinion. But I suppose Paul is a man and Marianne Faithfull is a woman, so that's, you know, that's a bit of an obstacle to try and overcome, if you can assume such a thing. But yeah, like I say, what was I saying? I've forgotten. I'll edit in what I'm actually going to say so I can read my script and then remember what I was going to say. I'm such a professional. There we go, I remembered what I was saying. So yeah, the melody of this song is great, and so is the lyrics. These lyrics on this song are some of McCartney's best. But to love her is to need her everywhere, knowing that love is to share, each one believing that love never dies, watching her eyes and hoping I'm always there. Changing my life with the wave of her hand, nobody can deny that there's something there. Just, these lyrics are brilliant. It's just, this song perfectly encapsulates the feeling of love, what it sounds like to be in love, just the way it's sung, the vocals, the harmonies, you know, the harmonisation between McCartney, Lennon and Harrison. It's brilliant on this song. George Martin, he downplayed his contribution to this song, but if he has coached them and arranged the harmonies to sound like this, then he deserves writing credit really more on this song than Lennon does. Now, I've said in the previous few videos that I think the first few tracks on Revolver have been deliberately sequenced to get more and more experimental. So it starts off pretty standard rock and roll with Taxman, Eleanor Rigby gets that little bit more experimental, then I'm Only Sleeping goes even more experimental, and Love You Too is pretty far out stuff for Western rock albums at the time. But then Here, There and Everywhere kind of brings it back down to earth a little bit to try and ground the album a little bit, because I think maybe by this point, if it kept going with another experimental song, maybe listeners at the time, they wouldn't have been able to handle it. So this kind of levels it down a bit with a more, I was going to say a more traditional sounding Beatles song, but I don't think you can actually describe what a traditional Beatles sounding song is, because they'd never done a song that sounded like this up until this point. So yeah, but what I'm trying to say basically is this song, being as a boy-girl love song, is a bit more traditional than something like Love You Too, where people are standing around screwing you in the ground and stuff like that. The guitar as well, it's brilliant. I'm rambling on here, I'm sorry. I love this song, I love Paul McCartney, so I'll just conclude it there. This song is brilliant. It is one of the highlights of Revolver. I can fully see why Paul McCartney says this is his favourite song. It's not my favourite McCartney song, but it would be definitely in the top 10, possibly even the top 5. Like I say, there's one song later on the album which I personally think is better than this one, but not by much. It's a brilliant song, this, I love it. So that concludes another episode of Revolver in Depth, folks. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please do like the video, leave a comment, let me know, do you agree with Paul that this is the best song he's ever done, or do you think there's a song he's done that's better than this? I think there's songs he's done that's better than this one. Not many, but yeah, this is one of his best for sure. But if you can think of any others and you would like to let me know, do let me know in the comments. There may be also songs on Revolver. I wouldn't blame you if they were. Or there may be something completely different. Let me know. Anyway, subscribe as well if you're not already subscribed. That would mean the great stuff to me. Great world, great deal. Yeah, okay. I'm very professional. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this and you've not seen the other episodes in this series, well, good news. There is a playlist on my channel called Revolver in Depth. That consists of all previous episodes and all future episodes in this series will also be added to that playlist. Anyway, join me next time here on Revolver in Depth, where it is, guess what? It's Ringo time, children. Yay! We all live in a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. Oh God, I'm gonna talk about yellow submarine, man.
Here, there.